Okay, so do me a favor. Just take a second and look around the room you're in right now.
Hmm.
Maybe you're in your living room or a bedroom. Maybe you're commuting. But visualize your home. Look at
Right.
your bookshelf. Look at that random vase or, poster you bought 3 years ago.
One you definitely didn't need.
Right. You didn't buy it because you needed it to hold water or cover a hole in the wall, but just because you liked it. Look at the door you can close when you want to be completely alone.
It feels incredibly normal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
idea that this is your private space filled with things you curated, things that reflect who you are deep down.
Exactly. We totally take it for granted. It's the default setting. But here's the thing, and this is what really stood out to me when we went through this massive stack of historical analysis for today's deep dive.
It wasn't always like this.
Right. This concept, this whole idea of privacy, of shopping for pleasure, of having a personal taste, it isn't the default setting for humanity. It was actually invented.
And relatively recently, too. I mean, if you went back to, say, the 1500s or even the early 1600s, this scene wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have a room of your own. You likely wouldn't own stuff just for the sake of owning it.
No random vases.
Definitely no random vases. And you certainly wouldn't be defining your identity by what you bought.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We are taking a deep dive into the 18th century cultural transformation.
A massive topic.
It is. We're looking at a stack of sources covering the Enlightenment, something called the Consumer Revolution, and the Reading Revolution.
And really, the mission here is to trace a massive shift in the human operating system. We are watching Europe move from a world that was dominated by kings, the church, and communal living into a bourgeois society.
A society focused on the individual.
Yes, the individual, commerce, and reason.
It's basically the origin story of the modern us. And we've got a roadmap to get through all this source material. We're going to hit this in 3 waves.
That's good.
First, the Consumer Revolution, which is basically the history of our stuff in our homes. Second, the Reading Revolution, which covers how we changed our minds and where we actually talked about those ideas.
And finally, we'll look at how art and literature visualize this entirely new world, moving from gold-plated cathedrals to, well, paintings of regular people doing regular things.
So let's jump right in. The Consumer Revolution. Now, usually when we talk about history and revolutions, we're talking about guillotines.
Or guys with muskets charging a hill.
Exactly. But the sources argue this was a revolution of shopping.
In a way, yes. But it started with a really fundamental economic shift. For the first time in history, you had a significant chunk of the population, specifically the middle and upper classes, who had something called disposable income.
Which sounds like a really basic economic term we use every day, but the implication historically is huge, right?
It's massive. Historically, that was so rare. For centuries, the vast majority of people worked just to survive. You bought what you needed to not die.
Right. Food, basic shelter.
A tool for your trade. You didn't buy a new shirt because you liked the cut. You bought a shirt because your old one literally fell apart.
Yeah.
But in the 18th century, that changes. People stop buying things just to survive and start purchasing based on desire.
This is that psychological shift the authors talk about. It's the exact moment we go from, I need a coat because I am freezing, to, I want that specific velvet coat because it makes me look sophisticated.
Precisely. And that shift changes the fundamental identity of Europeans. Before this, your identity was pretty rigid. You were defined by your religion.
Like Catholic or Protestant.
Right. Or your region. You were a shoemaker from Lyon. That was it. But with the Consumer Revolution, identity becomes about taste.
You are what you buy.
To an extent, yeah. It allowed people to self-fashion. If you could afford the right things, you could project a certain status, you could curate how the world perceived you. You weren't just stuck with the identity you were born into.
So let's talk about those right things. The sources list some specific must-have items of the 1700s that signaled you were part of this new polite society. It's a bit of a weird list, honestly.
It is a bit eclectic.
We've got porcelain dishes, cotton and linens, and my personal favorite, mirrors.
Mirrors are actually a really profound example. They do so much more than just decorate a wall.
How so? I mean, besides checking your hair or making sure there's no spinach in your teeth, what's the cultural impact of a mirror?
Well, think about the psychology of it. Before widespread manufacturing of mirrors in the 18th century, you rarely saw yourself clearly.
Oh, true. Maybe a murky reflection in a pond.
Or a piece of polished metal. But having a crisp, clear mirror in your own home allows for self-reflection, literally and figuratively.
It forces you to see yourself as an object, as a completely separate entity.
Exactly. It places the focus on the individual self. It creates a new kind of self-consciousness. How do I look? Slowly becomes, who am I? It reinforces that core idea of the individual being the center of their own world.
That is wild. I never thought about a mirror as a piece of revolutionary technology before.
It really was.
And then you have the other items like porcelain and cotton. These seem less psychological and more, I don't know, statusy.
Right. But the status piece is crucial. These were goods like porcelain from Asia, printed calicos that used to be reserved exclusively for the aristocracy.
Only the top tier.
Right. But now, with manufacturing picking up and trade routes expanding, the middle class, the bourgeoisie, could finally afford them. They could emulate the wealthy.
Basically, fake it till you make it.
It was more than faking it, though. It was a direct challenge to the old social order. The rigid hierarchy said, kings are here, nobles are here, peasants are down here.
But if a merchant can set a dining table that looks just like the duke's table,
That hierarchy starts to feel a little less divine and a little more porous. It was material self-expression being used almost as a social weapon.
okay, so we're filling our houses with cool stuff to prove we matter, but the houses themselves were changing too. This is where the notes got really interesting to me. We actually see the invention of privacy.
Yes, this is arguably the biggest shift in daily life. If you look at a typical home in the Middle Ages or even the early Renaissance, it was basically a multi-purpose box.
Just one big room.
You lived, ate, worked, and slept in the same communal spaces. The Great Hall concept.
So no, go to your room because there aren't really any rooms to go to.
Exact. Families slept together, often with servants or apprentices in the exact same space. Beds were expensive. Spaces were small. Privacy was essentially non-existent.
Wow.
But in the 18th century, architecture starts to specialize. You get rooms designed for very specific activities. Dining rooms, drawing rooms, corridors.
Corridors are huge, so you don't have to walk through someone's bedroom just to get to the kitchen.
Right. It completely changes the flow of human interaction.
And the sources highlight one room in particular that really tells the story, the boudoir.
The boudoir.
Yeah. Now, in modern pop culture, that word sounds a little, saucy, a little scandalous. But historically, what was the actual function of the boudoir?
It was a private retreat, specifically designed for the wife of the house. It was a space where she could go to be totally alone, to read, to write letters, to think.
It's like a she shed inside the house.
In a way. But think about what that signifies for the culture at large. A society that builds a room just for thinking is a society that values the individual's inner life.
That's a really good point. You don't build a wall around someone unless you think what they're doing alone is actually important.
It values emotion, reflection, and the need to separate oneself from the family unit. It's the architectural proof that me time was being invented.
Me time in the 1700s, I love it.
It's a physical manifestation of the idea that you are an individual with a private self that deserves space.
So we've got our private rooms, we've got our mirrors to look at ourselves, but we also need something to do in those rooms. And that brings us to the second wave of our roadmap, the reading revolution.
This is really the intellectual engine of the era. You have literacy rates climbing because of new educational efforts. Yeah. And at the very same time, the printing press is going into overdrive. Books are becoming cheaper and vastly more accessible.
But the sources make a really interesting distinction here. It's not just that people were reading more, they were reading differently. Can you explain the difference the authors point out between intensive and extensive reading?
Sure. This is a qualitative shift. In the past, intensive reading was the norm. A family might own one book.
Usually the Bible, right?
Usually the Bible,
Yeah.
and they would read it intensively, over and over and over again. You memorized it, you internalized it, it was a devotional act.
Depth over breadth. You knew that one book inside and out.
Right. But in the 18th century, we see the rise of extensive reading. People are suddenly consuming a wide variety of materials: newspapers, periodicals, pamphlets, novels.
They read something once, discuss it, and move on to the next thing.
Exactly. It's a much more modern way of consuming information.
The sources mention that in France, religious books were actually declining in sales, and books on history, law, and science were skyrocketing. We're moving from how to save your soul to how does the world work?
And nothing symbolizes that shift better than the absolute star of this era, the encyclopedia.
Denis Diderot's massive project.
It was such an audacious goal. Diderot wanted to compile all human knowledge, everything from philosophy to the exact mechanics of how to make a shoe. He wanted to capture the Enlightenment in print.
Which sounds great to us. I mean, it's basically Wikipedia on paper, but at the time this was considered really dangerous stuff. Why was a book of facts considered a threat?
because of how it was organized. This is fascinating. Diderot organized it alphabetically.
Okay, ABC. Sounds logical to me.
It is logical, but it's also highly subversive. When you organize by alphabet, you aren't organizing by hierarchy. In the old world, God and theology would be at the very top, then kings, then everything else.
Oh, I see.
But in an encyclopedia, Eucharist sits right next to engineering or economy.
Just because they both start with E?
Exactly. You are subtly saying that religious dogma is just one type of knowledge, and it's no more special than the mechanics of building a bridge. It questions religious authority and the divine right of kings just by existing. It democratizes information.
And the Catholic Church definitely noticed.
This certainly did. They tried to censor it. They banned it. The Pope hated it.
But here's the thing about the consumer revolution and the reading revolution combining. The public wanted it.
It became wildly popular despite all the bans. It proved that the public valued reason over dogma.
But where were they actually talking about this stuff? Because you can't just read the encyclopedia alone in your boudoir forever. You want to argue about it. You want to debate.
This is where the actual landscape of the city changes.
Yeah.
For centuries, if men met up to talk, they met at the tavern.
Beer, wine, rowdiness, the classic pub.
Intoxication. The tavern is a place of letting go. It's emotional, it's loud, it's about camaraderie through blurring the edges. But in the 18th century, fueled by the Columbian Exchange bringing all these new goods to Europe, we get the coffee house.
The vibe shift.
A massive vibe shift. Think about the chemistry here. Alcohol is a depressant. It blunts the senses. Coffee is a stimulant. It wakes you up. It sharpens the mind.
So the biological fuel for the conversation completely changed.
It did. Unlike the tavern, the coffee house became a venue for sober, rational discussion. You didn't go there to get drunk. You went there to get smart.
I love the description in the notes here. It calls them theaters for revolutionary ideas.
It's a perfect description. They're often called penny universities because for the price of a cup of coffee, literally a penny, you could sit and listen to the smartest people in town.
Wow.
You had men of different classes, aristocrats, merchants, writers mixing in these spaces. They were reading those newspapers we talked about, drinking coffee, and debating the news of the day.
And this birthed something we totally take for granted now, public opinion.
Yes, this is a crucial concept. Before this, the only opinion that mattered was the king's opinion. The public didn't have a voice. They were subjects, not citizens. But now you have this public sphere emerging in the coffee houses. A collective voice of informed citizens who feel they actually have a right to judge the government.
It's amazing to think that caffeine and newspapers basically created modern democracy.
It's not an exaggeration. The ability to discuss freely and rationally is the bedrock of Enlightenment politics. They believed that if you put enough rational men in a room with coffee, the best ideas would win.
So we've got the privacy of the home and the public debate of the coffee house. But what did this world actually look like? I want to visualize it. This brings us to our third wave, art and architecture.
Visual art is always a great mirror for society. We look at the period just before this transformation, pre-1750, we're looking at the Baroque style.
Give me the keywords for Baroque. If I'm walking through a museum, how do I know it's Baroque?
Opulence, grandeur, emotion, drama.
I'm picturing gold leaf everywhere.
Tons of gold. Think of the Palace of Versailles or St. Peter's Basilica. Think of Bernini statues that look like they are caught in a windstorm, fabrics swirling, faces in ecstasy, or J.S. Bach's music, which is incredibly complex and intricate.
And what was the point of all that drama? Was it just showing off?
It was highly political. The purpose of Baroque art was to make the viewer feel incredibly small. It was there to glorify the state, meaning the king, and the church. It was designed to make you look up and say, wow, they are powerful and I am nothing.
Obey.
Essentially, yes.
Divinely sanctioned power. But as the middle class rises, the art shifts. We start to see the rise of Dutch art, with guys like Rembrandt and Vermeer.
And they aren't painting kings and saints.
No, they are painting everyday life. The sources mention Rembrandt's slaughtered ox.
Which is exactly what it sounds like.
It is a painting of a literal dead ox hanging in a butcher shop.
That is a very far cry from a golden angel on a ceiling. Why paint a carcass? Because it's real. It's saying that everyday reality, commerce, food, the life of the common folk is worthy of being art. It's art for the middle class, depicting the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
It finds absolute dignity in the mundane.
It's almost like the first Instagram food pic. Just look at this steak.
It's a way, yeah. It's validating the bourgeois existence. And then as we get deeper into the Enlightenment towards the end of the century, we get a reaction against all that messy, emotional, Baroque stuff. We get neoclassicism.
Neoclassicism, so new classics.
Right. The Enlightenment is all about reason, logic, and order. So the art swings back to the classical world, ancient Greece and Rome, the ultimate symbols of logic.
Columns, symmetry,
Yeah.
clean lines.
Exactly. The source gives us the perfect example of the Pantheon in Paris, designed by Jacques Soufflot.
It doesn't look like a wedding cake. It looks like a math problem.
It looks like logic in stone. It represents citizenship, civic virtue, and order. It's not about overwhelming you with emotion. It's about inspiring you with reason. It visually aligns with that entire coffeehouse culture of rational debate.
So we see the shift in the buildings. We see it in the paintings. Finally, let's touch on the stories. Literature. Because if the encyclopedia was about facts, novels are about feelings.
And specifically, they're about the individual's feelings. This is a new development. The overarching theme of 18th century literature is the individual soul searching for meaning in a secular world.
We have three big hitters in the notes. First up is Daniel Defoe and Robinson Crusoe.
A classic. And think about the plot. A man is shipwrecked on an island. He doesn't sit around praying for angels to save him. He doesn't wait for a king to send a rescue boat.
No, he builds a hut, he farms, he counts his supplies, he keeps a ledger.
He thrives through individual effort and reason. It's a celebration of human capability without needing constant guidance from religious authority. It is the ultimate self-made man story. It's really the capitalist myth in a nutshell.
Then we have Goethe's Faust.
Faust captures the darker side of this new world. It's about that bourgeois anxiety, the endless yearning for more. More knowledge, more wealth, more experience.
The guy sells his soul to the devil just to experience more of life.
Exactly. It reflects that restless energy of the consumer revolution. The idea that we are never satisfied, we always want the next thing, the next breakthrough, even if it costs us our soul.
And finally, Jane Austen.
Austen is brilliant here. She takes this commercial world where money and status matter so much, and she deeply explores the private lives of people navigating it. She critiques the social game, but she focuses intensely on the nuance of individual experience.
It all comes back to that boudoir idea. The inner life matters.
Exactly. The novel allows you to enter the private mind of another person. It's the literary equivalent of that privacy we discussed in architecture. It trains us to have empathy for the individual.
Okay, let's unpack this whole picture. We've covered a ton of ground today, from porcelain dishes to dead oxen paintings, from coffee houses to Robinson Crusoe. So what does this all mean for us?
If we zoom out, by the time we hit 1815, Europe, and by extension the West, is fundamentally different. It has moved from a culture of absolutism, where the king and the church decide absolutely everything, to a culture of commercialism, privacy, and secular intellect.
It's the shift from we serve the king to I have my own life.
Yes, the public sphere has been invented. The private home has been invented. The idea that you can actively shape your identity through what you read and what you buy, that is the lasting legacy of the 18th century.
And it's just so relevant to us. When we curate our apartments to look a certain way, that's the consumer revolution. When we fiercely value our me time, that's the invention of privacy. When we get into debates about politics, that's the legacy of the coffee house.
We are quite literally living in the house the 18th century built.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting, the sources pose a pretty intense question about whether we are actually still living up to those ideals.
That is the big question I want to leave everyone with today. The 18th century built a public sphere specifically to escape the tavern. They wanted to move from rowdy, intoxicated shouting to sober, rational coffeehouse discussion. That was the dream.
Right. Reason over emotion, facts over feeling.
But look at our modern public square today. Look at social media. Look at the comment sections on any news article.
Oh boy. It definitely doesn't look very sober and rational.
It really doesn't. The question is, have we maintained that Enlightenment ideal of rational discourse? Or have we actually returned to the tavern? Are we just shouting at each other in a drunken rage? Only now the intoxication is outrage instead of ale.
That is a seriously haunting thought. Did we trade the coffee for the rage?
It's worth thinking about next time you scroll. Are you being a coffeehouse citizen or a tavern brawler?
Absolutely. On that cheery note, thank you for listening to this deep dive into the 18th century. Go enjoy your privacy, read a book, and maybe drink some coffee. We'll see you next time.